Welcome to Chapter 2, where DORA gets real. If Chapter 1 was the why, this is the how. This is Pillar 1, ICT Risk Management. And honestly, it's the foundation everything else rests on. Get this right, and the other pillars fall into place. Get it wrong, and nothing holds. So, what are we covering together? We'll start at the top with the boardroom. Who actually owns ICT risk, and why can't directors just hand it off to the IT team? We'll talk about personal liability, which tends to focus minds wonderfully. Then we build the machinery. We'll create an ICT risk strategy, set a risk appetite, and assemble an asset register. Basically, a map of everything you need to protect. From there, we move into the actual defenses, things like network segmentation, access control, encryption, and patching, the bread and butter of security. But protection alone isn't enough. So we'll cover detection, spotting trouble early, and then continuity and recovery, getting back on your feet fast. We'll close with backups and the all-important habit of learning from incidents. Here's why this matters. By the end, you'll see ICT risk not as a checklist, but as a living system. Shall we build it together? Let's start right at the top of the organization, in the boardroom. Because under DORA, this is where ICT risk accountability truly lives. And I know what some directors think. Technology? That's the IT department's job, surely. Let me gently correct that, because DORA does not let the board off the hook. Under this regulation, the management body holds ultimate accountability for ICT risk. That's a big statement, so let's unpack what it actually means in practice. The board must approve the ICT risk strategy and set the risk appetite. They must make sure there's enough budget, enough people, and enough skill to do the job properly. And they have to stay genuinely informed through regular reporting. Here's a real scenario I've seen. A board member once told me, proudly, that they trusted the experts completely and never asked questions about cyber. I had to be honest with them. Under DORA, blind trust isn't oversight, it's negligence. So think of the board like the captain of a ship. The captain doesn't personally fix the engine, but the captain absolutely must know the engine's condition, ask the right questions, and steer accordingly. That's the duty here. Active, informed oversight, not passive delegation. When you advise a board, your job is to turn them from spectators into genuine owners of the risk. Now let's talk about the thing that really gets a director's attention: personal liability. Because there's a world of difference between a company being fined and you individually being on the hook. And DORA deliberately blurs that comfortable line. Here's the key point. DORA places direct responsibility on individual members of the management body. You cannot fully delegate ICT risk accountability away and wash your hands of it. If oversight is inadequate, individual members can find themselves exposed to enforcement. That's a sobering thought, and it's meant to be. So what does this mean day to day? It means board members actually need enough ICT knowledge to ask intelligent, challenging questions. Not to write code, but to smell when something's wrong. Imagine a board being told everything's fine for 2 years, then a massive breach hits. We didn't understand the tech is not a defense DORA accepts. Here's my practical advice, and I give this to every board I work with. Document your engagement. Minute the questions you asked. Record the challenges you raised. Why? Because if regulators ever come knocking, that paper trail is your single best protection. It proves you were genuinely engaged, not asleep at the wheel. In the world of personal liability, demonstrated diligence is everything. Here's a mistake I see again and again, and I want to help you avoid it. Firms treat ICT risk as this separate, mysterious thing that lives off in a corner with the tech team. DORA wants the opposite. It wants ICT risk woven into your overall enterprise risk picture. So let's talk about why that matters. Think about how your firm already manages risk. You've got credit risk, market risk, operational risk, all flowing up through committees to the board. Now, where does technology risk sit? If the honest answer is in some IT spreadsheet nobody reads, That's a problem. ICT risk needs to sit right alongside those other risks, using the same language and the same reporting lines. Let me give you an analogy. Imagine a hospital where the heart specialists never talk to the lung specialists. Each treats their bit in isolation. But the patient is one body. Risks in a business are the same, they're connected. A cyber failure is an operational failure, is a financial failure. So, practically, align your ICT risk taxonomy with your other risk categories. Make sure it escalates into the existing committees and ensure your three lines of defense actually cover technology. When ICT risk speaks the same language as the rest of the business, the board finally sees one complete picture, not scattered fragments. Let's build something now. Every good compliance program needs a strategy at its heart, and DORA expects you to have a proper ICT risk management strategy. But here's where firms go wrong. They write a beautiful document that has nothing to do with what the business actually does. Let's not do that. The golden rule is this: your ICT strategy must be anchored to your business strategy. They can't live in separate worlds. If your business is racing to launch a new mobile app, your ICT risk strategy had better account for that. Think of them as dance partners. They have to move together or someone gets stepped on. So what goes into this strategy? It sets out your objectives, your governance roles, your resilience targets. It explains how you identify risks, assess them, and decide what to do about them. And of course, it must align with DORA's framework requirements. Here's a real example. I once saw a firm with a gorgeous, ambitious growth plan, opening in new markets, but a stale risk strategy written years earlier. The mismatch was glaring. The business was sprinting while risk management was strolling. So my honest advice: treat your strategy as a living thing. Review it regularly, especially when the business changes direction. A strategy that doesn't keep pace with reality is just decoration on a shelf. Let's talk about a phrase you'll hear constantly: risk appetite. It sounds a bit abstract, doesn't it? So let me make it concrete. Risk appetite is simply this: how much risk are you genuinely willing to accept? Because here's the truth: you can never reduce risk to zero. So you have to decide how much is okay. Think about driving. You accept some risk every time you get in the car, otherwise you'd never leave home. But you set limits. You don't drive at 20 miles an hour. That limit is your appetite. For a firm, it's the same idea applied to technology risk. Now, appetite alone is just a feeling. To make it useful, you translate it into tolerance thresholds, actual measurable limits. And then you set triggers, points where, if you're getting close to the edge, alarms go off and people act. Picture a fuel gauge that warns you before you run dry, not after. Here's why this matters in practice. Imagine a system that's supposed to be available 99.9% of the time. Your threshold might say, if availability drops below a certain point, escalate immediately. That's appetite turned into action. And crucially, link these thresholds to your critical functions and report breaches straight to the board. Appetite without measurement is just wishful thinking. Let me ask you a deceptively simple question. Can you protect something if you don't even know you have it? Of course not. And that's exactly why the asset register is so fundamental. You cannot defend what you can't see. So let's build your map. An ICT asset register is an inventory of everything technological that matters: your systems, applications, data, and infrastructure. But here's the part people skip. It's not enough to just list them. You have to classify them by how sensitive they are and how critical they are to the business. Think of it like a household inventory for insurance. You wouldn't just write stuff. You'd note the valuable things, the irreplaceable things, where they are, and who's responsible. Same logic here. For each asset, record its owner, its location, and crucially, its dependencies, what relies on it. Here's a real lesson from the field. I once worked with a firm that suffered an outage and genuinely couldn't tell which business services were affected because nobody had mapped it. They were flying blind during a crisis. Don't let that be you. And remember, this register isn't a one-time project. Systems change constantly, so keep it alive and current. An outdated map is sometimes worse than no map at all. Now we take the asset register one powerful step further. It's not enough to list your assets. You need to understand how they connect to what the business actually does. This is dependency mapping, and honestly, it's where the magic happens. Let me show you why. Here's the core idea. Every critical business function, say processing customer payments, relies on a chain of underlying systems. The app, the database, the network, maybe a third-party provider. Dependency mapping draws that chain out, link by link. And the moment you do that, something valuable appears, the single points of failure. Let me paint a picture. Imagine a row of Christmas lights, the old kind, where if one bulb dies, the whole string goes dark. A critical business function can be just like that. One overlooked component fails and the entire service collapses. Dependency mapping is how you find that one fragile bulb before it blows. So practically, link each asset to the function it supports. Trace dependencies on third parties and shared systems. Then focus your strongest protection and testing exactly where it matters most. Here's my advice. Don't try to map everything to the same depth. Start with your most critical functions and work outward. And update the maps whenever things change. A dependency map is your X-ray vision into how your business really works. Let's shift from what you own to what threatens it. Because protecting your assets means understanding two things: the threats coming at you and the vulnerabilities inside you. They are different, and the distinction really matters. Let me make it simple. A threat is something external trying to cause harm. A cyber attack, an insider gone rogue, a power outage. A vulnerability is a weakness in your own house, an unpatched system, a weak password policy. Here's the analogy I love. A threat is the burglar walking down your street. A vulnerability is the window you left unlocked. Real danger appears when the two meet. So DORA expects you to manage both. First, assess your threat landscape. Who and what might come for you. Then, hunt for your vulnerabilities through scanning and assessment. But finding them isn't enough. You have to score and prioritize them, because you'll never fix everything at once. Tackle the riskiest, most exposed weaknesses first. Here's a real-world rhythm I recommend. Treat vulnerability management like brushing your teeth. Regular, routine, never skipped. And keep watching threat intelligence so your picture stays current, because threats evolve weekly. The firms that get breached aren't usually the ones who didn't know about a weakness. They're the ones who knew and never got around to fixing it. Now let's get into the actual defenses, the controls that keep attackers out and contain them when they get in. I want to focus on three ideas here: segmentation, access, and the perimeter. Don't worry, they're more intuitive than they sound. Start with segmentation. Imagine a submarine. Why does it have watertight compartments? So that if one section floods, the whole vessel doesn't sink. Network segmentation is exactly that. You divide your network into sections, so if attackers breach one part, they can't roam freely across everything. You contain the flood. Next, access management. This is about the principle of least privilege. A fancy way of saying, give people only the access they actually need, nothing more. Does the marketing intern need access to core banking systems? Absolutely not. And use strong authentication, like multi-factor, for anything sensitive. It's the difference between one lock and two. Finally, the perimeter. Your firewalls, your filtering, your monitoring at the edge. Think of it as the castle wall and the guards at the gate. Here's my honest tip though. Walls alone aren't enough anymore. That's why segmentation matters so much. You assume someone will eventually get in. And one more thing, review access rights regularly. Stale, forgotten permissions are a gift to attackers. Tidy them up often. Let's talk about encryption, because it's one of the most powerful tools you have, and yet it's wonderfully simple to grasp once you see it clearly. At its heart, encryption scrambles your data so that even if someone steals it, they get gibberish, useless gibberish. So let's understand where to apply it. there are two states of data you must protect. Data at rest, that's data sitting still, stored on a server, a laptop, a backup, and data in transit, that's data moving, traveling across networks between systems. DORA expects you to protect both. Think of it like a valuable letter. You lock it in a safe at home, that's at rest, and you send it in a sealed, tamper-proof envelope, that's in transit. Here's a real example that makes it click. A laptop gets stolen from the back of a car. Nightmare, right? But if that laptop's drive was fully encrypted, the thief gets an expensive paperweight and nothing more. No data breach. That's encryption earning its keep. Now, a word of caution from experience. Encryption is only as good as your key management. If you scramble your data but leave the keys lying around, you've locked the door and taped the key to it. So manage keys securely, control access, rotate them, and use strong current standards. And always align your encryption to how you've classified your data. Let's talk about something that sounds boring but causes an enormous number of breaches. Patching. I know, install updates isn't thrilling. But stay with me, because the firms that ignore this are the ones making headlines for all the wrong reasons. Here's the reality. Software has flaws. Vendors discover them and release patches to fix them. A patch management process is simply how you apply those fixes in a structured, prioritized way. Why does it matter so much? Because the moment a flaw becomes public, attackers race to exploit it. It's a sprint, and you do not want to come second. Think of a famous breach you've heard about. Very often, the root cause wasn't some genius hacker. It was a known vulnerability with an available patch that simply wasn't applied in time. Painful and entirely preventable. But patching is just one piece. You also harden your systems, meaning you strip out unnecessary features and lock down configurations to reduce the attack surface. And don't forget your supply chain. Your suppliers and software sources carry risk too. Here's my practical advice. Test patches before you deploy them so a fix doesn't break something. Track your end-of-life systems, the old stuff vendors no longer support, because those are ticking time bombs. Unglamorous? Yes. Essential? Absolutely. We've talked a lot about keeping attackers out. But here's an uncomfortable truth I want you to accept early. Sometimes they get in anyway. So the question becomes, how fast will you notice? This is detection, and it's the difference between a small incident and a catastrophe. Think about a building. You've got locks on the doors, that's prevention. But you also have smoke detectors and security cameras, because despite the locks, things can still go wrong. Detection is your smoke detector for cyber. It's continuous monitoring, constantly watching for anomalies and suspicious activity. Two ingredients matter most here. First, logging. You need comprehensive, tamper-resistant logs, the record of what happened, so you can piece events together later. Second, alerting. Automated alerts that surface trouble fast, so a human can act. And ideally, you correlate events across different sources, because a single odd login might mean nothing, but combined with other signals, it tells a story. Here's the statistic that should motivate you. Attackers often sit inside networks for weeks or months before being noticed. Weeks. Imagine a burglar living in your attic, quietly, while you carry on as normal. Detection is how you shorten that window from months to minutes. And remember, detection only matters if it connects straight into your incident response. Spotting smoke is useless if nobody grabs the extinguisher. Alright, let's plan for the bad day. Because no matter how good your defenses are, something will eventually go wrong. The mature question isn't what if, it's when it happens, how fast do we recover? That's where business continuity and disaster recovery come in. Let me make the jargon friendly. Business continuity is your overall plan to keep critical services running or restore them quickly when disruption hits. Disaster recovery is the more technical piece, how you specifically restore your IT systems. Now, two terms you absolutely must know, and they trip everyone up at first: RTO and RPO. RTO, Recovery Time Objective, answers how fast must we be back up. RPO, Recovery Point Objective, answers how much data can we afford to lose. Let me make it real. Imagine you're writing an important document. RPO is how often you hit save because anything since the last save is lost. RTO is how quickly you can reopen and resume working after the crash. Here's the practical bit. For each critical system, you define these targets. And then, this is the part firms skip, you test your plans. A continuity plan that's never tested is just a hopeful story. I've seen plans that looked perfect on paper and collapsed in the first real drill. So write it, then prove it works. Let's keep talking recovery, but zoom into the unsung hero of resilience, backups. Everyone nods along about backups. Yes, yes, we have those. But in the age of ransomware, how you backup has completely changed the game. Let me explain why this deserves your full attention. Here's the modern threat. Ransomware doesn't just encrypt your live systems, it actively hunts for your backups too. Because the attackers know if they destroy your backups, you have to pay. So DORA pushes for offline or immutable backups, copies that attackers simply cannot reach or alter. Think of it like keeping a spare set of house keys at a trusted friend's home, not under the doormat where any burglar would look. But here's the part that genuinely worries me in practice. So many firms have backups, but never test restoring them. And there's nothing worse than a disaster striking, reaching for your backup and discovering it's corrupted or incomplete. It's like buying a fire extinguisher and never checking if it's actually charged. So the discipline is threefold. Keep protected offline copies. Regularly test that you can actually restore from them. And verify data integrity, confirming the restored data is correct and complete. And align your backup frequency to that RPO target we just discussed. A backup you can't restore isn't a backup. It's a false sense of security. Let's close this chapter on a really mature note. Because here's a mindset shift that separates good firms from great ones. An incident isn't just a disaster to survive. It's a lesson if you're willing to learn it. This is the post-incident review, and it's how you turn pain into progress. The idea is simple but powerful. After an incident, you run a structured lessons learned process. You dig into root cause analysis, asking not just what happened, but why it happened and why nothing stopped it. And then, crucially, you feed those findings back into your controls, your risk appetite, your whole framework. The loop closes, you come out stronger. Here's an analogy I love. Think of an airline after a near miss. They don't just shrug and fly on. They investigate relentlessly, share the findings, and improve procedures for everyone. That's precisely why flying is so astonishingly safe. They treat every incident as a gift of information. Now, a practical point for DORA. Document these reviews properly, because regulators will want to see that you actually learn, not just react. And report your improvement actions up to the management body so the board sees the cycle working. Let me ask you this. If you keep having the same incident over and over, what does that tell a regulator? Exactly, that you never truly listened the first time.